Welcome. I'm Tom Bankson with Bank Beat Magazine, and we've got an opportunity to interview and talk to Noah Wilcox, who's concluding a year as chairman of the Independent Community Bankers of America. Noah, how are you doing?
Hi, Tom. I'm doing well.
Great, great.
We're in full swing preparations for ICBA Connect coming up next Tuesday and Wednesday. So I've been busy with that the last several days.
I'll bet. And as you reflect back on your year, what stands out?
I was pretty fond of the saying early on in this pandemic, it's nothing new, it's what we do. I think what stands out is the resiliency of community bankers. I mean, not just the bankers, the communities that they support. I mean, they just rolled up their sleeves and got to work. And despite the fact that, we had PPP thrown in there and all of that. I mean, for example, at one of my charters, I did 870% of my first quarter loan volume in the first 13 days of round one of PPP. There were a lot of overtime hours. There were a lot of nights, weekends, missed birthdays, missed anniversaries, things like that. But I say all that to just underscore how truly committed community bankers are to their staff, their employees, their communities. And I think that's what really stands above. And I mean, I could go on and on about the PPP stats. I mean, community bankers truly carried the day on a federal program that saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions of small businesses and millions of jobs nationwide. And I'm tremendously proud of that.
Obviously, that's what people will remember this last year for, I'm sure. It was such a significant program, such a significant effort. As you think back about association initiatives, advocacy work that was done this past year, what stands out? What would you call accomplishments? What do you think? Is there some work that remains to be done?
Well, there's always work that remains to be done. I think that, without the help of ICBA advocacy, it's hard to move the needle on it. I mean, it takes the grassroots efforts of the banks, but it takes having that daily voice in Washington, D.C. with the members of Congress, with the various regulatory agencies, with the SBA, with Treasury. I mean, just to give you one example, I mean, I look at the rollout of PPP and all of the issues that we had at the front end. And I actually said this to Rebecca Romero-Rainey earlier today. Can you imagine what that would have looked like if ICBA had not had direct communication with the SBA to be relaying these issues and suggesting fixes and getting things out? I mean, those are the kinds of things that just make all the difference in the world. I mean, look, we got $60+ million secured just for small community bank institutions. We got a set processing window for community banks only. I mean, those kinds of things really count when you're trying to get PPP dollars to the people that the program was intended for.
Absolutely. And again, we know that community banks played a huge role in that all over the country, particularly here in the Midwest, where there are so many community banks. How about as you look at other issues? Obviously, there were things that happened. There were some developments on the Industrial Loan Corporation front. There were some developments on the CRA front. How about, what are your thoughts on some of those other issues?
Well, we've had some progress with the FDIC's December rule on ILCs, but we all know it didn't go far enough, and we're going to have to continue to push that. I mean, it seems to be the fashionable charter of choice for those who want access to the system without the oversight, and that's really an unlevel playing field, and it's something that I think ICBA, well, I know ICBA is going to continue to fight for. We've written white papers about the loophole, and I think we have Congress's ear. They can close that loophole. We just need to keep working with them. I think we'll get it done.
Do you get the sense that they understand the issue? Obviously, there's been a huge transition with the new administration, a lot of changes in both the Senate and the House. What's your sense for the current Congress and their grasp of this issue?
Well, I'll say this first. I'm all about the politics of community banking, not one side or the other, because we've got to work with them all to get it done. And I think that, we have members that clearly understand this issue. That's not to say there's not a lobby on it on the other side, because there is, but I think there's a very strong argument to be made. I think there's some current developments with certain entities seeking ILC charters that have crashed and burned in the past that are going to help our argument when we continue to talk about this with members of Congress.
Have you had a chance to get to Washington since the election and talk to some of the folks in DC? And do you feel like some of the momentum that was built up in the prior 4 years will keep going, or do you almost have to start over?
Well, I think first of all, to answer your first question, I've been in Minnesota since March 12th of 2020. So I have not been there in person, right. But I have had the opportunity to talk with a number of members of Congress, their staff, agency folks, people at the SBA, people at the Treasury, et cetera. And I think there is momentum. I think the thing to point out with any new Congress is there's a great deal of education that needs to take place. When you have so many new members, I mean, you need to really educate those new members on what community banks are, what they do for their community, how vital they are to the nation's economy, that they're the drivers of small business lending that create the significant portion of jobs in the United States. And, that's a massive undertaking. Leadership bankers and engaged bankers are making that education possible. So are members of ICBA's congressional relations staff. And just another reason that we need ICBA on our behalf in Washington every day while we're busy running our banks back on Main Street. So, we had tremendous momentum. I think we still have tremendous momentum. I'll just say this. I can't think of a more partisan time in my lifetime, the last several years. And we were getting things done for community banking on a bipartisan basis. So I think it just underscores that, when you can do good things for your community and help the members reach across the aisle to one another, you can get things done for the politics of community banking.
It was really quite a affirmation of the community banking industry. Congress wanted to inject stimulus into the economy and basically chose the community banking industry through which to accomplish that. Quite different really from 2008 when Congress also wanted to inject stimulus and really went to the nation's largest banks, but they did not repeat that tactic this time around. So I think that's really saying something. And as you mentioned, the community banks certainly arose to the occasion, did the job. There will be future crises, I assume, years, decades to come. Would you expect that Congress would continue to look to community banks to be the primary way to be delivering stimulus to the economy?
I don't think it's out of the question. You can point to round 2 of PPP. That they've looked to us again. And I've had meetings with my executive staff at both charters and said, listen, I think we need to understand that being conscripted to deploy federal programs to save small businesses or certain segments of the economy is probably part of our future business model. And we need to understand that. We need to plan for it. We need to think about what the best approach is. I didn't necessarily know if we would have round 2 of PPP. Had we, I think we probably would have hired a person to be the PPP coordinator I have somebody that does that, but she's got a full-time job doing something else. So it's a lot of pressure on her. So I think that it's changing that way. The economy will recover and, the economy will dip at some point in the future. And, hopefully we don't go through a pandemic like we're going through right now and have the kind of multi-shocks to the economy that we've had where these kinds of just unprecedented programs are required. But the likelihood of it happening is probably pretty good. And now that they've seen that a program like this works, and in concert with the regulatory community, encouraging community banks to work with their borrowers to make modifications, deferrals, interest-only periods, things like that ordinarily would be a little bit frowned upon. I think they've seen that it works, and there's a recipe for success in saving jobs, saving businesses, and ultimately saving the economy.
Let me just ask about credit unions. Do you feel like there was any progress made on that issue? There is certainly a growing awareness that there's this phenomenon of credit unions buying banks that's taking a tax-paying entity out of the the revenue stream for taxes. That has public policy implications. Is that message at all resonating with elected officials as far as you can tell?
I think it is. Here in the state of Minnesota, actually, there's going to be a hearing on a bill that would require the state to actually study that particular issue, not to take any action, but just to study the effect on taxes and the Minnesota economy of tax-exempt credit unions or any tax-exempt business buying a tax-paying entity. So, I mean, we've got ICBA's Wake Up campaign. I think that has been a very good vehicle for getting our message across. And I think it's important to note that while the tax-exempt status piece is a big part of the argument, there's a lot of other things going on. I mean, NCUA is like their cheerleader in chief as their regulator, and their actions seem to be more egregious time after time. And the overreach and how far outside the mandate of their charter that they're operating, especially with these big credit unions like Navy Federal, for example. I mean, it's just outrageous. And I do think that there are members of Congress that can see it. I know the credit union has a strong lobby, but at some point you have to start looking at the economics of it. And I think that's going to continue to happen. And at some point, they're either going to have to fall in line and toe the line of their charter, or they're going to have to convert to a mutual or convert to a full bank charter or something like that, because you just can't continue to take tax-paying entities out of the economy and replace them with tax-exempt ones, and then just expect rank and file Americans to step up and pay more taxes. It just doesn't. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom. So I said earlier today to somebody, these advocacy issues sometimes take decades. Credit unions has taken longer than a decade, and it may well take another decade, but I think we'll get that job done eventually.
A self-fulfilling prophecy of doom. I'm going to remember that. That's a great line. Let's just talk about just the nuts and bolts of representing a trade association. I mean, typically, this is a responsibility that involves traveling to many states, participating in their state conventions, and usually, those are working meetings, but they're also kind of fun. And that just didn't happen this year. And of course, I mentioned Washington. You mentioned that you didn't get the chance to go to DC. But I'm assuming that you still feel like you met a lot of people, you did a lot of things, you were effective. Talk about that a little bit. Help us to understand how the year went.
Sure. Well, it's not the year I anticipated. I couldn't have scripted this, of course, but I think it's important to just know that leaders rise to the occasion. And I didn't know what was going to be happening. I mean, I've been teasing Pres Kennedy all year that he had this, cakewalk for his year as chairman. And literally, as soon as he passed the gavel to me, the floor fell out. And so we had fun with that. But everybody was affected. And it wasn't just me. And early on, I had to just ask myself, how are you going to respond to your year as chairman in a virtual way? And just worked hard to adapt to that and to do as well as I could. And I think things went well. I mean, we didn't get to travel. And I think that's the thing I've missed most about my year as chairman is I'm a very social person, as you know. And Julie and I love going to the state conventions to speak and the ICBA meetings and meeting other bankers and reconnecting with the ones that we know and all that stuff. And we didn't get to do that. We did get to do it virtually, and that's fine. What I missed about the state conventions is usually Julie and I would go and we stay for the whole convention. And, these speaking engagements were, half an hour, 45 minutes here. And I would sit in on a few of the presentations and things to participate, but that's not the same. It allowed me to interact, I think, in a little bit of a different way, because typically, especially on the state conventions, I mean, I have a fairly well prepared set of remarks. I mean, I tailor it to each state, but for me, that was not a good deliverable in this virtual environment. So I would have conversations with the state association about what's going on with their members, how they're responding to the crisis, problems they're having, successes they're seeing, and then tailor some kind of a more like a Q&A type of deal. So it was more interactive. And I think that really resonated with the bankers, and I think it resonated with the associations. And for me, it was a much more comfortable way to have a discussion, because if I were to just get up and talk for 45 minutes and I can't see anybody and I can't gauge their reactions, I don't know if it's falling flat or if it's going over well. So, I mean, it's just been different. You've really had to adapt to those things and get pretty good at, paying attention to your framing of your Zoom call and all the rest of that stuff. So it's been different, but I think we've got a lot of good stuff done during my year as chairman. I'm proud as ever and completely humbled to have had the opportunity. Clearly my highest professional honor, and it is what it is. I mean, that's the way it happened, and that's what's in the books.
And we know that the pandemic has brought a lot of changes about in the banking industry, and some of those changes will be lasting. I think we can expect more virtual meetings. I mean, we'll certainly get back to face-to-face meetings, but some of the meetings we are learning actually make more sense virtual, or are more economical, or whatever. How about at the association level? Do you think there are, in what ways might the pandemic affect the way ICBA does its work throughout the country and in DC on an ongoing basis?
Well, this will be my opinion, not ICBA's. I mean, I don't know. That's up to Rebecca and her team. But I do think, in general terms, really for everybody, including the association, the work from home genie's out of the bottle and you're not getting it back in there. So there are going to be some staff, I would expect, that maybe express a desire to work from home at least some of the time. And ICBA will have to respond to that. I think there are some leadership meetings that, speaking of like leadership bankers with ICBA, that I can see some of that maintaining a virtual format, because some of the meetings that we have that are routinely in person, frankly, turned out to work really well in a virtual environment. So I think there'll be a lot of assessment going on at the association level as, a return to the office becomes more real, of how do we approach this? I'm doing the same thing in my shop. I mean, we're talking about, what does lobby usage look like? What do lobby hours look like? What kinds of transactions do you really not do in the lobby anymore that you might have before? And trying to assess how much of the customer base stays in the digital channel that they migrated to, and how many of them migrate back to a preference for in-lobby experiences. So those are things that I think we're all going to have to contemplate and respond to, because I think the biggest thing is the work from home genie's out of the bottle. And, I mean, I have a number of people that have second homes that probably would have loved for years to work remotely during the winter. And, that's not been an option in the past. And right now, several of them are working from warmer locations than where I am.
Sure. Well, Noah, we're going to bring this to a close, but you have an opportunity to address a pretty wide audience with this interview. And I don't know, is there anything else you would like to share with community bankers across the country? Any message that we want to make sure that you articulate?
Well, when I was on the stage in Orlando last year, one of the things I asked the bankers in the room to do was to really engage in grassroots advocacy, and not just at the C-suite level in their banks, literally reaching all the way down to the frontline staff and everybody in between. And that's something that I would say again here, is that it's so important. We can't expect our neighbors to carry our water. We've got to roll up our sleeves and make our voice heard. And the more people that want to join that chorus, the more powerful that voice is, and the more that we can accomplish for the good of community banking. And I'll just close with the fact that I'm so appreciative of all the support that I've received from bankers around the country during my year as chairman. And truly, I said it earlier, I mean, highest professional honor and truly humbling.
Well, Noah Wilcox, Grand Rapids State Bank, chairman of the Independent Community Bankers of America for the past year. Congratulations, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
This has been Tom Bankson with Bank Beat Magazine. And again, my guest has been Noah Wilcox. Thank you very much.